Hello, welcome to this module on, project costs, estimating project costs, preparing a project budget, and the big one, earned value management. Lots of formula in amongst all of that. So it's an exciting module for me, absolutely necessary for most projects that you run. Most projects have some sort of concern or consideration for project costs, and saying that, I've certainly worked on projects that cost isn't a factor as well. But for most project managers, this is one of the more important sections. Look, this is our goal. Quite simply, I want to give you the skills to be able to put together an individual budget for individual activities or items and aggregate all of that up into a lovely diagram like that. So we've got our individual estimates here and aggregating it all up like that. And then we're going to use that for earned value management, actually report on actual progress to date, both cost and time, interestingly enough, for earned value management. The real world is, unfortunately, that cost estimating, tracking, and management is very rarely done well. And it's often a guess. How are things going at the moment in the project? Oh, pretty good. They're on track. We think we're doing well. But good cost management and forecasting, properly communicated, really does add to the chance of the project's success. So that's what we want, rather than just fudging things or putting in a lot of effort at the beginning of the project, cost estimates to get that project approved, and then sort of just letting what happens. So that's our goal. Let's see how we go. We'll check in at the end to see if we've actually achieved that. Before we start, I just want to clarify how I'll be using the two words costs and budget. I use them as separate words. Costs and budget are, to me, separate words. When I say project costs, I'll be using that to mean the individual cost for a particular activity, item, deliverable, package. What does it cost? When I say budget, I'm going to refer to costs over time. So if you want to do your budget, you're going to need your project schedule first. So that's what I'll be referring to. So costs, individual cost estimates, budgets means all of those put over time. So the example here is, for this particular project, our cost is $103,000, but our budget is, when do we need that $103,000? Over what time period? Well, we need a little bit here in January, a lot here in August. So that is our budget, our cumulative monthly spend. Okay, so that's the difference. And that's how I will be using the terms, just for clarity. Now, you can use them any way you want once you get out into your own organization. They're often used interchangeably. What is your project cost? What is your project budget? Often means the same thing. But just for clarity, maybe you want to adopt my definitions of costs and budget so that you get that extra clarity for you. Now, before we proceed, look, here are some basic accounting terms relating to costs. If any of these are unfamiliar to you, you might want to consider like an Accountancy 101 paper. It's one of the things when project managers ask me what other things should they do beyond basic project management courses, I'll say they should do leadership courses, they should do a change management paper or learn about change management, and they should also do Accountancy 101. And the test that I give them, or give you to think about to see whether you need to do an accountancy paper, is if I gave you 3 bits of paper, and on one bit of paper was a profit and loss statement, the other bit was a cash flow statement, and the other one was a balance sheet, could you tell them apart and show me which was which? If the answer to that is yes, you probably know what's on the next slide anyway and understand them. If the answer to that was no, I highly recommend that you go do a basic introduction to accounting paper. There's lots of them online. And they're easy and relatively affordable, even free to get. But you will need those as part of your project management career advancement. So here are some basic accountancy terms that you will need to know. Variable and fixed costs are opposite ends of the spectrum. Basically, the variable costs that you will incur, they basically change with the amount of units of production. So if you produce more, you incur more of these costs. Whereas fixed costs, you incur whether or not you produce anything or not. So variable costs tend to be things like staff hours, if you're paying people an hourly rate, like project manager by the hour, or BA by the hour, or construction person by the hour. The more you get them to work, the more costs you incur. People on salary, though, would be a fixed cost. You're going to pay them whether they work or not. Office rental costs will be a fixed cost because you pay the office rent whether you're working or not, whereas materials needed to build will be a variable cost. The more you build, the more costs you incur. Direct costs and indirect costs. Direct costs are costs that are directly attributable to the work that your project does, i.e. the materials, the project manager, the team, the hardware, the software, directly attributable. Indirect costs. Now, your organization will have a particular way that it asks you to account for indirect costs in your project. Maybe that you have something like called an overhead cost, or it's added into people's charge out rates or that. But these are the costs that the company incurs, like general overhaul lease costs, overall lease costs for all the company, or electricity for the entire company, or insurance costs for the entire company. These are indirect costs. And it's not uncommon for organizations to have a policy that projects must account for a percentage of indirect costs in their project costs. And the last one here, just again, brief introduction. And if these don't make sense to you and you don't know what a profit and loss balance sheet or cash flow statement is, you do need to go do an Accountancy 101 paper. The last one here is sunk costs. These are simply costs that you've incurred on the project, which I guess very simply, if the project had to stop and you had to sell it online on whatever your internet marketplace is, what would you get for it? Now, if you're 2/3 of the way through a house project and you have to shut down, you're probably going to get most of your costs back. You'll sell the half-completed house, maybe get most of your project costs back, and there may not be too many sunk costs in there. But if you're halfway through a software project, imagine that you're halfway through a software project and you have to stop it. It's pretty much all sunk costs at that point. You're not getting anything back for it. The interesting thing about sunk cost is there is an international accounting standard, financial reporting, was it FRIMS or something like that? Somebody can correct me and send me what that is. It used to be called Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. GAAP, but changed over the last few years to a new standard. Basically says that when considering the future state of an investment, you shouldn't take into account sunk costs in considering that. So that's what sunk costs are. Your organization will have a particular definition and treatment of sunk costs. So as I said, if they're all new to you, go and do an accountancy paper, but learn how to put them into your project and what you have to account for in your costs. Hopefully, as you build up your costs on your project, you've got guidance from some sort of checklist that your company has of categories that you need to consider. So you may have to consider personnel costs, like the cost of staff, overhead or indirect costs that you've got to account for. Obviously, you're going to probably have to pay for the materials and equipment costs. Do you also have to provide for consultant support, consenting costs, finance costs, all insurance costs? The list goes on. The easiest way for you to do your cost estimating in your project is to have a checklist of all the costs that your organization expects you to account for and estimate on your project. So please go looking for that. We're going to put together our budget, and the first step in putting together our budget is doing individual cost estimates. And one of the easiest way to do this is using our work breakdown structure, because we can use individual elements of our work breakdown structure, no matter how far we've broken it down, and then use one of those estimating techniques that we covered in the estimating techniques module. Hopefully you've watched that one already, where we covered the 10 different estimating techniques and a discussion on uncertainty in each of them. So what we want to do now for cost estimates is to go and find one of those estimating techniques that's appropriate based on the level of detail and our desired level of certainty, and take our work breakdown structure and apply our particular estimating technique to this. So obviously for these higher level ones that are up here, we might choose analogous or rough order of magnitude. And if we can break things down to here, we might do bottom up, parametric, or 3-point estimating, and takes a bit more effort but is more accurate, whereas these ones less effort, less accurate, and add all those up. So if you recall, I'll try and list them all over here. Let's test my memory. I should know this. So the 10 estimating techniques were rough order of magnitude, You can help me out here. You can yell. I can't hear you because it's a recording. Top down. If there's top down, there's bottom up. There's 3-point estimating, or the PERT technique. PERT estimating, which is optimistic plus 4 times realistic plus pessimistic divided by 6. There's parametric. There's experts. I'm just going with the ones they come in. There's database, and there's getting a fixed price. And if there's parametric, there's also analogous, and there's Delphi. How many did I get? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I got 10. Look at that. I got all 10. Wow, I must know what I'm talking about. So those are the 10 different techniques that we ran through in the estimating techniques module. So if you need a refresher, pop back and have a looking at those, because I'm going to assume you've done all of those and that you know how to apply your chosen estimating technique to your work breakdown structure. Or if you don't have a work breakdown structure, elements of your project scope or project chart, or something that describes the work, and you can use a particular estimating technique. So one of the things we want you to do is, once you've decided on your particular estimating technique, is to put together a list of individual cost estimates. So here what we've done is we've taken, sorry, I clicked that too fast. We've taken different cost estimates here from our WBS or our Gantt chart or our project scope statement, whatever it is. And we've got different cost estimates here. But what we've done also is we've let people know what estimating technique we've used and the uncertainty in it. So here we've got a quote for design and planning. We've got a quote for site preparation, and they're more accurate at plus or minus 5%. And then we're moving on to analogous at plus or minus 10%. We've indicated the level of uncertainty there. And then we've used parametric for the rest of it. And that's got 10% certainty, because obviously we've got pretty good data. To get 10% certainty plus or minus, you need pretty good data. So we've added that all up, and that's our total cost estimate for this particular library, the community library case study that we're using. And this becomes our budget at completion. That's the official term we're going to use, the BAC, the budget at completion there. Okay, budget at completion. And obviously then if we aggregate and give these all a weighting, we could actually come up with a defensible contingency reserve based on that. And here we're probably looking at that is about just under just over 10%. So you're probably looking at just under a 10% contingency, to be honest, maybe a 9% contingency. And that's a defensible way to build up a contingency reserve. We do have some other ways to build up contingency reserves coming up, so stay tuned for that. So that's what we want, individual cost estimates. Now remember, this is just our costs, not our budget yet. This is just our costs. And we communicate this to people, how we got it, what our cost estimate is, and whether we need to revisit it in the future, like as we go through. So some of these cost estimates, like our landscaping, they might be done in a year or two's time when we've finished this building. So we may indicate that this one may need to be updated 6 months out from the plan, and that this is good for us right now. Okay, so we want to indicate all of those assumptions that we've made. Now, taking these individual cost estimates and putting them into a budget just means putting them over time. So we've got to have our project schedule there. Here it's by quarters, and we're indicating when we're going to spend this. So that $150,000 is going to be spent in the first quarter, second quarter. This $600,000 is going to be spent over 2 quarters. And this might be the aggregation of weekly or monthly estimates here for our schedule. Just for convenience, I'm showing it as quarters here. And again, this is when we plan we're going to spend this. So there we are. We can get all of that, and that will become our budget. And obviously we can aggregate that up for a line diagram, and I'll show you that very soon. So we're going to take all of that information, and I'm just using Excel here, but any of the project management software that you're using will do this for you. As long as you put in the individual cost estimates and when it's going to be incurred. or link it directly with your project scheduling software, your Gantt chart. And if you're using a really good bit of project management software that brings all of this together, and you put in the activity, the cost estimate, the uncertainty, and when, it will then be able to produce Gantt charts and budgets all automatically. Otherwise, you're using Excel and project and things like that. So now that we've got the individual cost estimates that you saw 2 slides ago, and then the time when they will occur, which you just saw on that last slide, we can put it all together to make our budget. As I said, I'm going to use Microsoft Excel because it's easy to use, easy to show you how the concepts are. But all good project management software and financial software will do this for you. So you don't need to be putting this all together like I've done. So if you'll see here, what I've done is taken the activity cost estimates, there they are there. Okay, I've indicated when they were going to happen by putting them across here from that last diagram. Adding them all up like this, and here they all are. There's the individual monthly spend there, and then there's the cumulative spend. Now, often in project management, we have what's called an S-curve. So it's not uncommon to have a project budget which looks like that, which indicates that at the beginning of the project, you might be spending quite slow as you get started. You reach the middle portions of the project where you really know what you're doing and production's ramped up, and then towards the end, the line gets flatter again as you slow down spending as well. So that's what we want. Is that. And that's our budget. So remember, it's costs over time. And as I said, I do want to stress you don't need to do this manually. I've done it manually. If I've worked for an organization that doesn't have the information that I need, I'll do it by Excel as well. So let's talk about individual contingency reserves, because everybody has their own ways of doing this. The main thing with contingency reserves is not just make something up. You don't want to be making anything up. What you want to be able to do is to use some transparency and justification to build up your contingency reserve. Now, there are 2 types of reserve we're going to deal with here. There's contingency reserve and management reserve. They mean different things. So the first one we'll deal with is contingency reserve, which should be decided up front and should be under control of the project manager and the project sponsor. It's already been agreed that it's available should the event upon which the contingency is dependent on arises. The project manager and the sponsor should have access to the contingency reserve to use for that purpose. Okay, not just for anything else that comes up. Contingency reserves are generally linked to a specific contingency, whether it's a specific event or a general cause. So let's go through some of the easiest ways to work up your contingency reserve. The first one here is lessons learned from past projects. Oh, I left that on pink instead of changing it to green. Let's change it back to green. Pink's a bit offensive. There we are. Green, much better. Doesn't stand out so much. So lessons learned from past projects, perfectly acceptable way to build up a contingency reserve. Go and have a look at recent projects. How did they deal with reserves? Now, reserves applies to cost and time as well. What did they do well? What sort of contingencies arose? What sort of provision do you need to make in your new projects based on historical information from past projects? It's a great way to figure out a defensible contingency reserve as well. Risk assessment and quantification. This is with quantitative risk analysis. So the risk assessment module that you can go and do deals with qualitative and quantitative risk assessment. And with quantitative risk assessment, we can actually get a dollar figure or a day figure, if it's time, based on quantitative risk analysis. And we can add all of those up to get a defensible contingency reserve. So we won't go over that one here in depth, but go and do the risk management module, particularly the quantitative risk analysis, and we will cover it there. Benchmarking, we can simply go and compare our project to similar projects or other industry standards where there's published data on these sorts of projects generally require this much contingency reserve. And then you could either just use that or make sure that yours is within the ballpark of that to make sure it's defensible and transparent. So there's often industry standards there for what sort of contingency reserves are normal or useful on particular types of projects. You may have a rule of thumb within your organization. It's not uncommon for organizations to say we have 5% or 10% of the total budget as a contingency reserve. But this should be based on historical information, not just a made-up figure. So you should be able to look back over recent projects that you've done in the organization and generally say our organizational policy is to allocate 5 or 10% of the total project budget as a contingency reserve for all contingencies that arise. So that's absolutely acceptable. Hopefully by now you're recognizing one that you may already be using. The next one is expert judgment. Just go talk with the experts. Don't forget you're an expert, subject matter experts, team members are all experts, and go and ask them about risks or uncertainty or estimating techniques or past projects that I've worked on, and ask them what's a defensible contingency reserve. I keep stressing that it's important for it to be a defensible contingency reserve. And then finally, you can take the weighted average of all of your uncertainties in each of your individual estimates. So you could use analogous estimating with its uncertainty, parametric estimating, and do a weighted average of all of your individual cost estimates and get a weighted average range of uncertainty. And that again is defensible. So that's what we're looking here for a contingency reserve, is transparent and defensible, as opposed to simply just making something up and hoping that it sticks. Now, a couple of other things about the contingency reserve. If you're getting towards the end of the project and the contingency that was identified as possibly needing extra money for it passes, you are to give that money back to the organization. You're not to hang on to it and keep it for something else that may come up that you haven't identified. That's not what you do. We're going to deal with that in management reserve on the next slide. I know of one organization or one project that had a great underspend, mainly in the contingency reserve, which wasn't used. And the project managers went off and did a completely other project with it without telling anybody. There's major problems with that, obviously, from lots of different reasons. But we want you, if your contingency reserve isn't utilized, to hand it back. Okay, so we've talked about contingency reserve, and the next one to talk about is management reserve. Now, management reserve is another amount that might be allocated, but it's held by management and controlled by management. So contingency reserve is controlled by the project manager and the project sponsor. It's already agreed up front, and if that contingency arises, they have authority usually to use it, or they may have to seek approval if it's a large amount, but it's predetermined and pre-allocated, and it's within the known, project constraints. A management reserve is an amount, sometimes you see them wrongly called like a slush fund or something. A lot of organizations might take 10% of their overall portfolio spend, call it a management reserve, and this is available to projects that encounter something that could not have been foreseen, some unknown, whereas it's often said that contingency reserves are for known unknowns. So something pops up that you could not have reasonably foreseen, you had no way of forecasting or providing for it, so you can apply to management to use a portion of the management reserve. And it is at the discretion of management whether they allocate it or not, but obviously they still have to help you figure out the issue that's popped up. So that's what management reserve is, and in my experience, it's typically been worked up by the finance department, something like that, 10%, 7.5%, 5%, based on what they know has worked in the past. So that's how you do with reserves. Now, a quick word on organizational budgeting, because this is something that project managers need to be aware of, and I find that most project managers aren't. This is when project managers think that their project is all that matters, and why is the finance team bothering me to give them updated estimates about when I'm going to spend the money, or am I spending it faster than I thought I do? Do I need it in the next financial year? Your finance team is out there doing organizational budgeting, okay, and that's why they need you to be upfront about it. So let's take a look at this diagram, this one over here. What this one shows is the finance team has looked at your organizational budgeting for the year. And they've said that the green line is money coming into the organization. They've done their forecast based on when everybody thinks invoices are going to be paid to them or money's coming in. But they've also done the same for money going out of the company based on when you've said, all the project managers together have said, these are all our projects, this is what our spend profile is, our budgets. That's their cumulative one. Now, if you take a look at this diagram, already the finance team has identified at this point in the year, there's a lot more money going out than there is coming in. There's a big gap here. Now it's up to the finance team to figure out, how do we fill this gap? We've got a lot more money going out than coming in. What are they going to do? Well, they may have to use their cash reserves. They may have to organize a debt facility, go get a loan. They may have to do a call on shareholders' funds or go to the market to raise more funds. But they're the ones who have to figure out what happens in this gap here. So what's this all got to do with an individual project manager? Well, here's the thing. If you're not keeping your particular project's budgets updated, you could be spending slower than necessary or faster than necessary, and this gap could be bigger or smaller. Now, the other example that I'll give you is, a few years ago, I was asked by an organization to help them sort out a major issue that they had. So they had a bunch of project managers who did a lot of capital works, roading projects, footpath projects, bridge projects, things like that. They worked for a local council, and each year the finance team would ask, in the next financial year, how much will you spend and when do you need it? And the project managers, there are about, I think, about 20 or 25 of them, would say, well, look, the next financial year, we're going to need $300 million. The finance team would go, right, show us when, and this is what the project manager would show them, something like this. We'd need that $300 million like that. And the finance team would then look at the money coming into the council from, taxes, rates, other sources, and they would have figured this all out. Okay. But what was happening with this $300 million, we discovered, was that the finance team each year, and this stayed static for about 3 or 4 years, each year the capital works program project managers would say, we're going to spend about $300 million, but each year they only spend about $240 million of it. Things went slower than they thought. Now, it wasn't really a problem in one sense, because they'd say, look, we didn't get that work done this year, but we'll get it done the next year. And they did. But once again, they would say, we're going to get $300 million done the next year. And once again, and it repeated itself for a while, they only got $240 million done. They didn't see what the problem was. It wasn't until we pointed out that the finance team, to make sure that they had the $300 million available, it had to go out and organize debt facilities for a significant part of it. So they had money available to the project managers throughout the year, as the project managers had indicated. What we discovered is that they were paying application fees of $180,000 just for the debt facility that wasn't used, the $60 million that wasn't needed or wasn't used. And there were some other costs incurred as well. Once we explained this to the project managers, they went, oh, now we see the implications. So they got a bit smarter with it and became a lot more honest about if they weren't spending as fast, they let the finance team know, and the situation got better. So can I please encourage you as a project manager to be honest and transparent, because you will be if you're spending faster than you think, because you might need the finance team to bring forward money from future years into this year so you can spend it, or they may want to take it from other projects which aren't spending as fast so you can work faster. But please keep your finance people happy by being completely honest and transparent with them about the rate in which you're spending. They'll sleep better, and you'll sleep better as a result of it. So we've got 2 sections to go here. So don't think this is the end of the section. This is just a very brief section to, using those estimating techniques to build up your project costs, using your project schedule to turn into a project budget, and then it's how much we need and when we need it. So the next section is earned value management. So this is, instead of being at the end of the session, this is mid-session, mid-module. So let's go through this and just see if you've been paying attention. So we've got some words here on the left-hand side, and we've got some definitions on the right-hand side. So what is management reserve? Is it A, B, C, D, or E? Is it an amount of money set aside for unknown unknowns? Costs that are incurred by the project, whether or not work is being completed? Is it C, an amount of money set aside for known unknowns? Is it D, costs incurred on the project that are directly related to the amount that should be produced, not reduced? Another spelling mistake. Let's rub that out. not going to rub out. Or is it the project costs viewed over the time period in which they'll be incurred? So what's a management reserve? A, B, C, D, or E? Well, hopefully you said it's A, an amount of money set aside for unknown unknowns. So what's a contingency reserve then? Is it B, C, D, or E? Hopefully you said it's C, an amount of money set aside for known unknowns. What about fixed costs? Is it B, D, or E? Hopefully you said it was B, costs that are incurred by the project whether or not work is being completed. What is a project budget? Is it D or E? And what is variable costs? Is a project budget costs incurred on the project that are directly related to the amount produced? Actually, the spelling mistake there. Or is it the project cost viewed over the time period in which they'll be incurred? Well, obviously, hopefully you said that variable costs are D and project budget is E. Okay, got to go through and fix those spelling mistakes. Rightio. Now we move on to the tough part of this. This is the earned value management technique. And this helps us understand how our project is going in terms of cost and time performance. So it's not just about cost, it is about time or schedule as well. And this gets us around that situation. Say I'm a project manager and you're part of my project team or project steering committee, and I stand in front of you and I say, right, I'm your project manager. This project's supposed to cost $1 million and take 1 year, so 12 months, $1 million. We are 6 months into it and we've only spent $400,000. We're all good. So we're halfway through, but we've only spent 40% of the budget. That's all good. Now, some people go, yeah, that sounds really good. But the problem is I haven't told you the complete story. I haven't told you how much work we've done or how much value we've earned. That's the part of earned value management that we want. Now, that scenario changes completely. So remember, we're $1 million over 12 months. We're halfway there, we're at the 6-month mark, and we've spent $400,000. Now, if we've only done 30% of the work, that's a terrible situation, really terrible. We're behind schedule and we're over budget. But if we've done 50% or 60% of the work, we're well under budget and we're well ahead of schedule. So you've got to figure out that last thing. And most of us are really good at tracking our planned spend and our actual cost, our PV and our AC, our actual cost, but we've got to get good at doing the earned value management. So let's take a look at an example that we're going to use throughout this. So this is our community library case study, which appears throughout these modules. And in this case, the scenario is you are the project manager on a new community library with an approved budget of $3 million. The project is forecast to take 30 months, so that's 2.5 years. You are 15 months into the project, so we're 50% of the way through it, and you've spent $1.4 million to date. And your reporting shows that you've completed 40% of the work so far. That's the earned value, the value of the work that you've done. We'd turn that into a dollar figure. So we want to be able to take this and prepare something that shows us how we're doing on cost and time. So it's not just cost. So let's use these figures and work through some earned value terms. Here we go. So the first terms we want are our budget at completion, our planned value, our earned value, and our actual cost. Now, our budget at completion is our approved budget plus it's our original budget plus approved changes. It's whatever our approved budget is. It's not the original one, it's the original one plus approved changes, which is our cost baseline. Okay, so our budget at completion at this point, how much we originally planned for the project to cost, $3 million. That's our BAC. The next thing is our planned value. How much you plan to spend on what we'd achieved at this point in the project. Now we know at this point in the project, we're halfway into it. I did mention before that typically projects have an S-curve, in which case we would need to read off it. If we were halfway through the project here, we would need to read off it what our planned value was. That's our BAC line, our budget line. Any point on that line is our planned value. So our total PV out here actually equals our BAC. Sounding nerdy now, I know. Okay, but for the purposes of this exercise, we're not going to assume an S-curve. We're just going to assume a simple linear spend. That's it. So if we're 50% of the way through the project, we should have been 50%. So our PV is 50% of our BAC, which in this case is $1.5 million. Now, we'll move on to actual costs next, because that's the next easiest one to explain. This is where we're actually tracking what we've actually spent on our project to date. And in this case, we've spent $1.4 million. Now, remember, we're at this point in the project, halfway through it. So we're tracking, and we're tracking our actual cost, and it's a little bit below. That's 1.5 there, that's 3 up there. So we're at 1.4 here, million dollars. Okay. But now the thing that we need to know is, what is the value of the work that we've completed? Well, from the example before, it said that we had done 40% of the work that we thought we'd do. So that means the original value we ascribed to that work was $1.2 million. This one here. Not what it's cost us, but the original value that we prescribed to it based on this was $1.2 million. So that's our earned value. So now that we've got our budget at completion, our planned value, our earned value, and our actual costs, now we can move forward and do the earned value calculations and see how we're going in terms of cost and time. Now, this is all very confusing. Sometimes I know, and it's not the easiest way to explain this, but you can refer to the book that I wrote, to the Introduction to Project Management. It's got a great example of this. And as always, if you have any questions, you can contact me and I will take you through all of these step by step by step. But those are the first 4 figures you need to get out. Now, your software is probably going to do them for you. The software will definitely do budget at completion, actual cost, plan value, and you will need to report on what work you've done and the value of that work, the original value of it, not what it's cost you, the original value ascribed to that work. Okay, so let's go through now and use our first formula, which is going to be cost variance, CV, and cost performance index. Now, our cost variance is the difference between the value you expected to create and the actual cost of creating it. So it's the difference between earned value and AC. So it's just EV minus AC. Now, our earned value was $120,000 and our AC was was $1.2 million. Our AC was $1.4 million. So it's negative $200,000. It's a negative number. That's bad. Positive is positive, negative is negative when it comes to cost variance, or even schedule variance down here, by the way. So we know that it's not good, but we don't know how bad it is. So this time, instead of subtracting AC from EV, we use the same numbers, EV and AC here, but we want to get a performance index where 1 is perfect, okay? Above 1 is good, below 1 is bad. Okay, so this time, instead of it being 1.2 minus 1.4, it's 1.2 million divided by 1.4 million, and that gives us a cost performance index of 0.86. Now remember, 1 is good, anything above 1 is really good. This means for every dollar we're investing in this project, we're getting 86 cents back. That's not good. Okay, so that's our cost analysis. At this point in the project, it's not good. Now we can also go to time or schedule calculations as well. This time we've got the schedule variance, which is earned value minus our planned value. So this time our earned value was 1.2 million, our planned value was 1.5 million, so therefore our schedule variance is a negative number again, negative $300,000. So we know it's not good, and giving us the performance index tells us how bad it is. So in this case, it's our earned value divided by PV, EV divided by PV. So our EV was 1.2 million, our planned value was 1.5 million. So therefore, we've got an SPI of 0.8, which means that for every day we're working on this project, we're getting 0.8 days of effort back. So this project, with a CPI of 0.86 and an SPI of 0.8, is in trouble. Certainly, given that it's halfway through. If this was in the first 10% of the project, I wouldn't be too worried. It's like everybody's still bedding in and learning and you can fix mistakes. This project is halfway through. I would consider that some major red flags. But again, these figures give us a snapshot of where we are right now in the project. What we want to be able to do is, like, based on this performance to date, what's the most likely future scenario going to be? And that's the other part of earned value management, which is really useful. So now we can go to the future and we can use our estimate at completion. We know what our budget at completion is, what we originally thought it was going to cost. But now, based on our performance to date, how much do we think it's going to cost so far? Interesting thing is here, I've seen over 16 different formula to do this. We're going to use the four most common. So if you go to sit like the Project Management Professional credential, the PMP credential, these are the formula that we would teach you to pass that credential. So these are the four most common. Okay, let's run you through these. You'll notice they each give a slightly different answer too. Now, this is the most common one, your actual costs plus your estimate to complete. So what's this? What's estimate to complete? Well, estimate to complete is the remaining cost that you've estimated to finish the remaining amount of work. That's it. So you take what you've actually spent to date and you simply add to that what you still think you've got to spend. Now, you should go back to first principles estimating here and estimate the remaining cost. Go back and use those different estimating techniques, look at the remaining work and figure out what is our estimate to complete, our ETC. Now, by the way, this is the default formula that your software uses because it can tell you what your actual costs spent to date are. It just looks at your accounting system. That's what you've spent to date. And then it will ask you to put in your ETC, your estimate to complete, hopefully based on first principles estimating again to figure out how much more do we need to pay to do the remaining work. So that's that one there. Some of the formula-based ones, this is your budget at completion, and to it we've just applied your cost performance index to date. So this would be our budget at completion, which is 3 million. Our cost performance index was 0.86, so it's 3 million divided by 0.86 gives us an estimate at completion of 3.488 million. That's definitely more than our budget at completion of 3 million. So variance at completion, which is coming up next, is the difference between our BAC and our EAC. So in this case, our variance at completion would be negative 488,372, which is not good. It's a negative number. Here's another formula here, actual costs plus BAC minus EV. For the statistically minded amongst you, you will realize that BAC minus EV, our budget at completion minus earned value, is another way to kind of express estimate to complete in terms of amount of value left to go. So that's another way to express that. So simply adding that to our actual costs, our BAC was 3 million, our earned value was 1.2, and you add that 1.8, so that's 1.8 million. You add that to our actual costs of 1.4, and you get 3.2 million. Now this one here is actually my favorite formula. This is the one I prefer to use because it takes into account what you've spent to date, the remaining value of work to be done, and then it applies to that both your cost and time performance to date. This one is my favorite, and I will take along an Excel spreadsheet. As a consultant, I often get called in to fix up troubled projects, so they're usually midway through or things like that. And I'll take my own spreadsheet along and extract the data I need from the organization's financial reporting and project management software to populate these figures. But I have found this formula for me personally to be, if we're more than 30% of the way through the project, this becomes super accurate. On one project that I worked on a few years ago, it was a 2.5-year project. It was $20 million. We knew 6 months into that project that we were going to come in $1 million under budget using this formula. We actually came in about $1.5 million under budget. But early on, this formula told us that the rate that we were working and our cost and time performance would bring us in under budget. So this is my preferred one. And here, if you use this formula, you'll actually see that instead of being nearly $500,000 over, you're going to not be too far off. So anyway, again, it's the quality of the data going in. So that's the one that you're probably going to end up using. And the key thing is here, go back to first principles, to re-estimate your estimate to complete. Okay. Last couple of slides here on different formula. ETC, as we've seen, that's our estimate to complete. How much more money do you need to finish this project? as I've said already, you can do first principles and go back and say, well, we're actually going to sit down. Or a quick formula is we take our estimate at completion and we subtract from that what we've already spent to date. Now that's a roundabout endless loop. If you try and put that into Excel and try and use that ETC in that previous slide, you'll get an error with Excel. So that's just an easy way to say our estimate to complete is our new estimate at complete minus, or at completion minus our actual cost spent to date. Our variance at completion is simply the difference between our budget at completion and our now estimate at completion. That's all it is. You obviously want this to be positive, not negative. You want EAC to be less than BAC. As we saw before, it wasn't with our example. So that's variance at completion. And the last one I'm going to introduce you to. Now, as a disclaimer, this is a very high-level introduction to earned value management. It's sufficient for you to use your software, but there are lots of other formula that you can use. And it gets very detailed, and it's quite an area of study on its own. The TCPI, the Two Complete Performance Index, is how fast you need to go, the rate at which you need to work to hit either your EAC or your BAC. So if you really want to get things back on track and try and hit your BAC, that's how fast you need to work. And less than 1 here is good. So if you have to work at 0.9, that means for every day you only need to do 0.9 effort to hit your original BAC. And if it's greater than 1, that's bad. So if you did that calculation, it came out 1.2, it'll basically tell you that you need to work, for every 1 day, you need to work at 1.2 days effort to hit your BAC, or you could be trying to target your EAC, and that ratio will give you how fast you need to work to hit either your BAC or your AC. So this is certainly the most technical topic we cover in all of these modules. The other technical topics are things like network diagrams and forward passes, backward passes, leads, lags, slack, float, things like that. But this is probably the most technical here. But just know that your software will do all of this for you. Here's a real status report taken from a project of mine a few years ago now. I know it says 2021 at the bottom, but it was actually a lot longer ago than that. And you'll see here the blue line is the one that you're probably used to seeing. That's our budget for this project when we thought we would spend it. This was actually over about 8 months. There it is there, the blue line. And so any point on that blue line is our planned value. It's the value we plan to have created in the project. And the end point out here, our total PV or planned value, is our budget at completion. The green line is the line that most of us track, which is the actual cost spent to date. So you can compare that to the blue line. That's what most of us track. And the orange line is our earned value. So let's take a look at a particular point in the project. Let's go right here to that point in the project. So we've got 3 data points here. Here we can see that that was our planned value. Our EV is less than our PV, and our AC is less than our PV. Now, what's interesting here, if we take a look at that, let's take a look. Now, we thought we would do this work here. We didn't actually do that work to here. So that gap there is how far behind schedule we are. But we thought we would spend this much, and we've only spent this much. So that gap there is our underspend. So this project is showing that we are under budget here, but we're also behind schedule. So that maybe tells us that we could use our underspend maybe to help speed things up with crashing and things like that with our schedule compression techniques. And right at the end of the project here, you'll see that we were under budget, but we didn't quite deliver everything that we said. And in fact, we probably would have needed another week to deliver that. So we were just a little bit behind schedule, but definitely under budget, which is all good news too. So that's some real earned value data. So look, this is again, nice high level, quick introduction to earned value management. It can be quite confusing, but I don't want you to be confused by it. Again, if you've got any questions at all, drop me an email or a message and I'll spend some time with you to walk you through this, or I'll re-record this, make it bigger and more in depth, whatever works for you. So just do that. So, just recapping, The tools and techniques associated with cost management, building those individual cost estimates, aggregating them with your project schedule into a budget, which is costs over time, enable you to get a really good picture on what's going to happen. Don't forget, it's always subject to progressive elaboration too. Don't treat that first cost estimate at the beginning as the cost for the project. It's going to change. Have your proper change control process and delegated authority in place to deal with it. Always treat your estimates as a communications exercise, and that's from the estimating techniques module as well. If you tell people how much things are going to cost, put the range of uncertainty and how you got it there. And then finally, once you've got your budget prepared, use it to track your actuals against earned value and assess the impact of variance. Now, none of those earned value calculations is what I call a death sentence. They're all an early warning that says, if you keep going like this, this is where you could end up. So they're all an early warning to change things and act. So that's their real value. So that we've come to the end of that session. I do acknowledge it's a confusing one, and hopefully it made sense to you. And once again, just reiterating, if it didn't, just contact me, and I'll be more than happy to take you through things slowly. But thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate it. I do look forward to hearing from you. And yeah, have a good day.